Welcome to lecture number 4. Lecture number 1, 2, 3 May, we did the basics of cost and management accounting. What is cost accounting? What is management accounting? Then we did a small comparison of cost accounting, management accounting, and financial accounting. Then I briefly told you about the organizational structure of a normal company operating in the market. We also discussed different terms related to the managerial accounting. In lecture number 4, 5, and 6, we will discuss the concept of cost. Now, whenever we talk about cost and management accounting, the most important term that comes to our mind is the concept of cost. Why? Because cost and management accounting is all about the internal accounting of any organization. So any organization, whether it is in the manufacturing industry or it is in the service industry, has to keep in mind the cost it incurs while giving goods or services. So what we'll do in lecture 4, 5, and 6, we will discuss the concept of cost. We will discuss different types of costs with respect to the production or with respect to the services. So the generic definition of cost is: the term cost is a frequently used word that reflects a monetary measure of resources sacrificed or foregone to achieve a specific objective, such as acquiring a good or services. As you know, the basic assumption of accounting is the monetary unit assumption, which means that any transaction which can be quantified in terms of money, only it becomes a part of the accounting framework. So cost will always have a monetary unit attached to it, or whatever cost that cannot be quantified in terms of money cannot be taken as a cost, since there is no value, monetary value attached to it. So now we'll discuss in detail the concept of cost. Now, what is a cost object? A cost object is any activity for which a separate measurement of cost is desired. In other words, if the users of accounting information want to know the cost of something, that this something is called a cost object. इसकी example मैं आपको देता हूँ. For example, there is a company which makes motor vehicles. Let's say Suzuki Motors. अब Suzuki Motors का modus operandi ये होगा कि it will be, since it is producing cars, so they should know for any car that they produced, how much cost do they incur. For example, if there's a car, let's say Suzuki Mehran, so they should know कि Suzuki Mehran की एक unit of production में उनकी total cost कितनी आती है. So in that scenario, that motor vehicle will be the cost object. Examples of cost objects include the cost of a product, the cost of rendering a service to a bank customer or hospital patient. For example, एक hospital में एक patient आता है. Now you should know how much cost you will incur while servicing that patient. So that patient will be the cost object. We shall see that the cost allocation system typically account for cost in two broad categories. What does the two broad categories statement mean? कि जब भी एक आपका cost object आता है, तो obviously you will have to allocate cost to that object. Number one, उसका method होता है कि it accumulates cost by classifying them into certain categories such as type of expenses, e.g. direct labor, direct material, and indirect cost, and also by the behavior of that cost, which is fixed and variable cost. ये जितनी terms जो मैंने आपको बताई हैं, we will discuss these terms in detail later on. तो फर्स्ट वन होता है कि यू एक्यूमुलेट द कॉस्ट. फॉर एग्जांपल आप कॉस्ट देखते हैं कि इस प्रोडक्ट की कॉस्ट कितनी है, वो तमाम कॉस्ट यू स्टार्ट एक्यूमुलेटिंग. So you know how much cost is normally incurred. Then the second one is then you assign these costs to the cost objects. जब एक cost आपको आपने calculate कर ली है टोटल, अब आपने ये देखना है कि इसमें से कौन कौन सी ऐसी कॉस्ट थी which can be directly linked to that cost object. So the second part is always how do you assign the cost which has been calculated to that cost object. Now what we'll be covering in this chapter, and the chapter is chapter number 2 from your book, and it's titled An Introduction to Cost Terms and Concepts. You already have the books with you, so what you'll do, you'll go through the chapter. You should go through the videos that I upload, and that will give you a very clear picture of what the chapter is about, and then we'll discuss whatever questions you have in the MS Teams session that we have online. Now, what sort of cost terms and concepts we'll be covering? We will cover direct and indirect cost. We will discuss period and product cost. अब direct and indirect cost जो है and period and product cost, ये जो है ये cost normally these two concepts are always directly linked to the cost accounting. So these two you should do in a lot of detail with clarity so that you know what we will be covering later on. Then we'll have cost behavior in relation to volume of activity, relevant and irrelevant costs, avoidable and unavoidable costs, sunk costs, opportunity costs, and incremental and marginal costs. Now, when we talk about the industries, so any industry can be normally subdivided into three major categories. One is your manufacturing, then you have merchandising, and then you have service organizations. To provide a better understanding of how different cost terms are used in organizations, it is appropriate to describe the major features of activities undertaken in the manufacturing, merchandising, and service organization. You should know when we talk about a manufacturing industry, what does it really mean? When we use the term merchandising or service organization, what sort of activities and what sort of costs are normally associated with these? Now, what is a manufacturing organization? Manufacturing organization is any organization which is into the production of supplies by using the raw materials that it uses. Manufacturing organizations purchase raw materials from suppliers and convert these materials into tangible products through the use of labor and capital inputs. Obviously, when we talk about a manufacturing organization, उसका अपना कोई प्लांट होगा, उसकी कोई प्रोडक्शन फैसिलिटी होगी, वहां पे उसके पास कोई मशीनरी होगी. तो ये तमाम चीजें जो हैं, ये तमाम चीजें आर लिंक्ड टू द कॉस्ट कैलकुलेशन of that manufacturing company. This process results in manufacturing organizations having the following types of inventory. Raw material inventories. Raw material वो raw material होता है जो आप purchase करते हैं. Then you use that raw material to make finished goods. Finished goods वो goods हैं जो which are ready for sale but have not yet been sold. So those goods are called finished goods. फिर आपकी एक थर्ड कैटेगरी होती है, उसको कहते हैं वर्क इन प्रोग्रेस. It is also called work in process. Work in progress or work in process, which is called WIP. So we will be using the term WIP. WIP consists of partially complete products awaiting completion. ये वो products होते हैं बेसिकली जो रॉ मटेरियल का जिन पे प्रोसेस स्टार्ट हो चुका है बट दे हैव नॉट येट बीन फुली कंप्लीटेड, उनको कहते हैं WIP. तो आगे जाके हम वी विल बी यूजिंग दिस टर्म WIP अलॉट. ये तो था बेसिकली मैन्युफैक्चरिंग का. नाउ वी विल कम टू मर्चेंडाइजिंग कंपनीज such as supermarkets, retail departmental stores, and wholesalers. What these departmental stores do, they sell tangible products that they have previously purchased in the same basic form from supplier. For example, when you go to a supermarket, and let's say if you want to buy uh, a packet of chips, तो वो जो पैकेट ऑफ चिप्स है दैट हैज ऑलरेडी बीन सप्लाइड बाय द सप्लायर. और वो सप्लायर कौन होगा? वो सप्लायर ऑब्वियसली आपका होगा मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इंडस्ट्री से. So जो merchandising है, they buy ready-made products from the suppliers, and then they sell it to the normal customer. Then we have the service organization. Service organizations are the organizations that deal in providing service to the customers. Let's say if you go to a dentist or if you go to a doctor will give you a service, a dentist will give you a service. So that is called the service organization. Service organizations do not have finished goods inventory, but some service organizations do have work in process. Now, why do the service industry why does the service industry has no work in process? Uh, has no finished products. उसकी वजह है कि जो सर्विस है it can only be a work in progress, or it can be a delivered service. It can never be a service that has been completed but has not yet been given to the customer. Then we will so now you know the three main categories of the industry. One is manufacturing, then you have merchandising, and the third one is service organization. Then we'll discuss direct and indirect cost. In generic terms, direct cost is any cost that can be directly attributed to the product or service. When you look at that cost, you immediately know that this cost, this product or this service was used in making that product. Direct material. Direct cost जो होती है, direct cost is divided into डायरेक्ट मटेरियल एंड डायरेक्ट लेबर. इसी तरह जो इनडायरेक्ट कॉस्ट है, इसमें भी यू विल हैव indirect material, you will have indirect labor, and then you will have manufacturing overheads, which we will discuss in the next lecture. Now, what is direct material? Direct material costs represent those material costs that can be specifically and exclusively identified with the particular cost object. For example, furniture ka hai. When you look at the furniture, so the first direct material that comes to your mind is the wood that was used in making that furniture. In manufacturing organization where the cost object is a product, physical observation can be used to measure the quantity consumed by each individual product, and the cost of direct materials can be directly charged to them. जैसे आपको एग्जांपल बताई मैंने वुड की. अब उसके बाद सेकंड एग्जांपल हो सकती है गैराज की. गैराज में परचेज पार्ट्स फॉर व्हीकल रिपेयर्स. These parts can be identified with the repair of each customer's vehicle, i.e. the cost object, and thus are equivalent to the direct material. For example, you went to a garage and you wanted to get your the headlights of your car changed. तो जो नई रिप्लेसमेंट उसने लगाई headlights की, that is a direct material, and which can be easily and exclusively identified and pinpointed to that cost object. Then you have direct labor. Direct labor costs are those labor costs that can be specifically and exclusively identified with a particular cost object. Physical observation can be used to quantify that labor. The direct labor cost in producing a product includes the cost of converting the raw material into a product, such as the cost of machine operatives engaged in the production process in the manufacture of television. For example, when you go to a garage, तो जो मैकेनिक ने आपकी गाड़ी पे अपनी लेबर लगाई, that labor is the direct labor because it can be directly linked to the cost object, which is your car. Then we have indirect costs. Indirect costs cannot be identified specifically and exclusively with a given cost object. They consist of indirect labor, materials and expenses. इसके जो expenses हैं उनको कहते हैं manufacturing overhead that we will discuss in the next lecture. In a manufacturing organization where products are the cost object, wages of all employees whose time cannot be identified with the specific product represent indirect labor costs. Examples include the labor costs of staff employed in the maintenance and repair of production equipment and staff employed in the stores department. For example, when you go to a departmental store, so जो sales person है उधर उसका जो salary or wages है it can be directly identified to the cost object, so वो आपकी direct लेबर है. लेकिन इनडायरेक्ट आपकी लेबर हो सकती है, फॉर एग्जांपल उस डिपार्टमेंटल स्टोर में जो क्लीनर है ना, उस क्लीनर की जो सैलरी है इट कैन नॉट बी डायरेक्टली एट्रीब्यूटेड टू द प्रोडक्ट, सो इट विल बी द इनडायरेक्ट कॉस्ट. Examples of indirect expenses in manufacturing, service or departmental store where products, the provision of services or departments are the cost objectives include lighting and heating expenses and property taxes. These costs cannot be specifically identified with a particular product, service or department. लिहाजा जैसे आपको बताया ये आपकी indirect cost होंगी. Now the term overheads is widely used instead of indirect costs. In a manufacturing organization, overhead costs are categorized as manufacturing, administration, or marketing overheads. Manufacturing overheads include all costs of manufacturing apart from direct labor and material. इससे आपको अंदाजा होगा कि जो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कॉस्ट है किसी भी प्रोडक्ट से रिलेटेड, उसमें आपका डायरेक्ट मटेरियल आया जैसे आपको मैंने बताया और आपकी डायरेक्ट लेबर आ गई. फिर जो आपकी इनडायरेक्ट कॉस्ट आती है दैट इज कॉल्ड मैन्युफैक्चरिंग ओवरहेड. अब इससे इस डायग्राम से यू कैन सी two more cost terms. One is the prime cost. Prime cost consists of all direct manufacturing cost, i.e. the sum of direct materials and direct labor cost. So जो आपकी direct material और direct labor cost है, it is called prime cost. Or conversion cost, the sum of direct labor and manufacturing overhead costs. It represents the cost of converting raw material into finished products. कन्वर्जन कॉस्ट क्या है, जो आपका डायरेक्ट मटेरियल था उस पे जो आपकी लेबर और जो ओवरहेड लगा, सो वो बेसिकली डायरेक्ट लेबर और ओवरहेड आपका कन्वर्जन कॉस्ट है, जिस कन्वर्जन कॉस्ट से आप अपने डायरेक्ट मटेरियल को फिनिश्ड प्रोडक्ट में कन्वर्ट करते हैं. तो ये आपका था मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कॉस्ट. अब डायरेक्ट एंड इनडायरेक्ट कॉस्ट में आपकी एक तो नॉन मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कॉस्ट आ गई, फिर आपकी एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव ओवरहेड्स आ गए और आपके मार्केटिंग ओवरहेड्स आ गए. ये तमाम चीजें ऑलरेडी इसमें मेंशन है. यू शुड गो थ्रू दिस पैराग्राफ एंड अंडरस्टैंड इट. Now, distinguishing between direct and indirect costs. Sometimes direct costs are treated as indirect because it is not cost effective to trace costs directly to the cost object. For example, the nails used to manufacturing a particular desk can be identified specifically with the desk, but because the cost is likely to be insignificant, the expense of tracing such items does not justify possible benefits. तो होता ये है कि डायरेक्ट और इनडायरेक्ट कॉस्ट में बाज़ दफा इट इज योर यू यूज योर जजमेंट टू डिस्टिंग्विश बिटवीन दीज टू. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, आप अगर एक डेस्क बन रहा है तो उसमें जो कीलें लगी थी नेल्स, नाउ दिस कॉस्ट इज वेरी स्मॉल टू बी एट्रीब्यूटेड डायरेक्टली, सो यू कैन यूज इट एज एन इनडायरेक्ट मटेरियल rather than direct material. A cost can be treated as direct for one cost object but indirect in respect for another. For example, if the cost object is the cost of using different distribution channels, then the rental of warehouses, ये भी it all depends at the end of the day at the judgment. आपने देखना है कि आपकी कंपनी के लिए सबसे suitable methodology क्या है और and then you will adopt that methodology. Assigning direct and indirect cost to cost objects. Direct cost can be traced easily and accurately to a cost object. For example, where products are cost objects, direct material and labor used can be physically identified with the different product that an organization produces. In contrast, indirect costs cannot be traced to cost objects. Instead, an estimate must be made of the resources consumed by cost objects using cost allocations. जो हमने आगे स्टार्टिंग में डिस्कस किया था कि पहला क्या होता है कॉस्ट एलोकेशन का और दूसरा क्या होता है then you have to first one is how do you accumulate cost and the second step is how do you allocate that cost. A cost allocation is the process of assigning cost when a direct measure does not exist for the quantity of resources consumed by a particular cost object. Cost allocations involve the use of surrogate rather than surrogate means a supplementary rather than direct measures. For example, consider an activity such as receiving incoming materials. अब आपने देखना है कि आप अगर एक कंपनी को इनकमिंग मटेरियल्स मिल रहे हैं तो उसने देखना है कि एक अगर प्रोडक्ट से रिलेटेड एक रॉ मटेरियल से रिलेटेड लेट्स से उसको 20% उसके ऑर्डर वो होते हैं सो इट कैन एलोकेट 20% कॉस्ट 20% of cost that can be attributed to receiving the incoming material. ये एग्जांपल आप पढ़ेंगे. It will give you a clear understanding of allocation. Now, what is period cost and what is product cost? Period costs are those costs that are identified with goods purchased or produced for resale. Generic terms में अगर देखा जाए तो आपके आगे से terms गुजरी होंगी cost of sales और cost of goods sold. तो जो cost of goods sold है वो product cost होती है. Product cost is any cost that can be directly attributed to that product. And period costs are those costs that are not specifically related to manufacturing or purchasing a product or providing a service that generates revenue. So the period cost is always related to the period, be it the financial year. For example, आप देखेंगे किसी भी कंपनी की जो annual cost होती हैं उसमें आपकी उसकी अपने administrative expenses होते हैं. So those expenses are the annual cost or the period cost. और जो उसकी product cost होती है that is the cost of goods sold. Whenever you have the product cost and you subtract it from the total revenue, so you get the gross profit. And when you subtract period cost from that gross profit, then you get the net profit. अच्छा, अब इसको हम I'll explain this with the help of a diagram. अब how do you treat period and product cost? Manufacturing cost में जो आपकी प्रोडक्ट कॉस्ट होती है उसमें जैसे आपको बताया कि वो आपका बनता है कॉस्ट ऑफ सेल्स या कॉस्ट ऑफ गुड सोल्ड. तो जो प्रोडक्ट कॉस्ट है अगर तो वो अनसोल्ड है इफ इट हैज नॉट बीन सोल्ड it will always be treated as a current asset in your बैलेंस शीट. क्यों? क्योंकि वो आपकी इन्वेंट्री होगी उसमें फिनिश प्रोडक्ट हो सकता है या वर्क इन प्रोसेस हो सकता है और वो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कॉस्ट जो आपकी प्रोडक्ट कॉस्ट में थी और विच हैज बीन सोल्ड उसको आप एज एन एक्सपेंस लेके जाते हैं अपनी इनकम स्टेटमेंट में और साथ साथ जो नॉन मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कॉस्ट है वो डायरेक्टली आपकी एज अ पीरियड कॉस्ट जाती है एक्सपेंस में. लिहाजा ये दोनों कॉस्ट आपकी प्रोडक्ट कॉस्ट और पीरियड कॉस्ट बोथ ऑफ दीज कॉस्ट go to the income statement but the only difference is in the time कि किस टाइम पे उस कॉस्ट को इनकम स्टेटमेंट में एज एन एक्सपेंस लेके जाएंगे. आपकी जो प्रोडक्ट कॉस्ट है वो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कॉस्ट है उसमें आपका डायरेक्ट मटेरियल डायरेक्ट लेबर और MOH आ गया मैन्युफैक्चरिंग ओवरहेड्स और आपकी जो पीरियड कॉस्ट है उसमें सेलिंग एक्सपेंसेस और एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव एक्सपेंसेस होते हैं. इसमें जो इंपॉर्टेंट चीज अब आपकी नोट करने वाली है वो ये है do merchandising service organization need to distinguish between product and period cost? The answer is yes. Companies operating in merchandising sector purchase goods for resale without changing their basic form. जैसे मैंने आपको बताया था departmental store में आ गया. The cost of goods sold for a merchandising company would consist of beginning merchandise inventory plus the purchase of merchandise during the period. जो हम आगे जाके डिस्कस करेंगे अपना एक ओपनिंग स्टॉक होता है एट परचेज थ्रू आउट दी फाइनेंशियल ईयर, और उसमें से आप सेपरेट करते हैं क्लोजिंग स्टॉक, तो वो आपको देता है कॉस्ट ऑफ गुड्स सोल्ड ड्यूरिंग दैट पीरियड। ये आपका आ गया मर्चेंडाइजिंग और उसका। नाउ इन द नेक्स्ट वन वी विल स्टार्ट डिस्कसिंग मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कॉस्ट इन फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स। ये जितनी हमने कॉस्ट रिलेटेड टर्म्स आपसे मैंने डिस्कस की हैं, हाउ डू वी यूज दीज टर्म्स in the financial statements. So this is the end of lecture number 4. Lecture number 5 and 6 we will go into further details regarding the concept of